Hello, good morning to our first Councillor information session for 2025. We have with us this morning our first guest speaker will be Enrico Peretti, the General Manager, Invasive Plants and Animals from Biosecurity Queensland. Welcome, Enrico.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. Thanks for taking the time to speak about biosecurity and the land protection fund. I think that's of great interest to you. So just a quick background on who I am. So I've been General Manager in Invasive Plants and Animals for the last 2 years, and excited to 2025 because biosecurity is very important for Queensland. We've got 1.8 million square kilometres of pristine environment and fantastic farmlands. Queensland produces 60%, I think, of the beef of Australia. So there's big challenges in front, and biosecurity is part of the tools that will help us tackle those challenges, I think. So I believe in that. First of all, I want to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which we all are, and on which we meet today, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people among us today. I've got a bit of a heady accent, so if you can interrupt me anytime if you want a clarification or if you've got questions. So please, let's make it a bit informal. Happy to do it that way if you're happy. Okay, so as I said, Queensland's worth protecting because our economy, our communities and our environments are extraordinary. Travelled around the world, I think this is the closest we get to paradise, Queensland. There's a big push on the environment now with the Canning-Montreal agreement signed, etc. So there's a lot. You'll see there's a lot of push about protecting biodiversity, but we don't want to do that at the price and the sacrifice of our food and fibre industries and of our lifestyle, of course. But it all needs to work. We all need to work as partners to protect Queensland. Speaking about partners, Biosecurity Queensland are building on that partnership. We can't deal with this 1.8 million square kilometres by ourselves. We're a small department, I can say. And Biosecurity Queensland is very small, so we have to work with industries, different state agencies like TMR, etc. But key for invasive plants and animals is working with you, with local governments, I think. So you've read through the news. There's a lot of impacts. There's a lot going on with tomato rugose virus or bird flu. Red imported finance. So biosecurity is at the top, and we're trying to deal with all these challenges and develop tools to manage these challenges and respond. Happy to take any questions on Varroa or bird flu, etc., if you wish. Tools that we have to manage the biosecurity challenges. Well, first of all, the Biosecurity Act 2014, which is a very flexible and agile act, I think. It's a pretty good tool to manage biosecurity because it speaks about the general biosecurity obligation, and we'll maybe discuss about that afterwards. But we've also got a few strategies on, so how are we going to manage biosecurity? So there's the Queensland Biosecurity Strategy. So it's your strategy, it's our strategy. That's for all Queenslanders. That was published last year, and we've just got the newly released Queensland Invasive Plants and Animal Strategy 2030. So these strategies are really key, and especially the Invasive Plants and Animals one really defines roles and responsibilities throughout the biosecurity continuum. Okay. Now, this is also just to remind myself, local governments play a key role as partners under the Act. Each local government must ensure that invasive biosecurity matter is managed in their council and on their lands. And this needs to be in compliance with the Biosecurity Act 2014.
So invasive biosecurity matter includes prohibited matter, like I think tropical soda apple, maybe you've heard about that weed, and restricted matter, like wild dogs, dingoes, for example. So under local government law, you can determine what matter you want to legislate and regulate. So under the Biosecurity Act, there's schedules for prohibited and restricted matter, but very recently we've reviewed the legislation, and now local governments can appoint, if you wish, or select matter, biosecurity matter of concern just for them. For example, you could determine that horses are biosecurity matter for your council, if you wish. Is that correct, Ted?
Correct.
Yeah, good. He's the source of all wisdom in that space. Okay. Under the law, every local government also needs a biosecurity plan. And I think your plan has just expired. So happy to discuss a way forward in rejuvenating that plan. I was reading it. It's a very good plan, I must say. Not all local governments have biosecurity plans, so we're going to try and influence local governments through discussions with LGAQ to try and get everybody to have a biosecurity plan, every local government to have a biosecurity plan. And of course, under the law, you've got the opportunity to develop biosecurity programs like preventive programs, surveillance programs, or control programs to manage the invasive biosecurity matter on your land. And again, we're happy to assist there. When I say assist, there's also a lot of work in preparedness, and we can discuss this in depth afterwards. So, Biosecurity Queensland is providing a lot of tools and training material, and hosting a lot of workshops to train people in how to manage biosecurity incidents. So they have put an email address. If you're interested, you can contact that email address, and we would be happy to discuss what workshops, courses, or training we can provide to members of your council. Okay, Land Protection Fund. I think that's the main topic. There you've got one of the weeds that's on your biosecurity plan. The mother of millions bryophyllum from Madagascar, a very, very prolific weed. So the Land Protection Fund, I don't know if you know much about it, but it is a system of payment that's collected from landowners by local governments on behalf of the state. And that's legislated by the Biosecurity Act. So local governments harvest money for the state as per regulation and legislation in the Act. So it's really state money harvested from constituents through local governments, if you wish. And the purpose of this fund is to provide for activities that help local governments manage invasive plants and animals. Basically, the purpose is to provide tools to manage invasives. So the fund funds research, funds training, educational programs, funds boards, and I think Craig, you will be speaking more about that afterwards. And it's there to assist local governments. So there's a few components, four main components of the Land Protection Fund under the law. There's the on-ground and research component. So contributions of 60 local governments out of the 77 in Queensland fund research and on-ground work in the biosecurity space. Okay, and we'll speak a little bit more about that afterwards. The Land Protection Fund is also 50% of the wild dog barrier fence, the 2,500 kilometre equivalent of the Great Wall of China for Australia. A historic piece that we're currently reviewing, doing a bit of a cost-benefit analysis of the fence and functional analysis of the fence. The fund also funds Darling Downs, Moreton, Rabbit Board, and Craig, you'll be speaking about that, and also the Plague Pest Contingency Fund. But because, thank God, we haven't had any issues with plague locusts for the last few years, that fund is full, more than $500,000 in the kitty, and we don't require any more funding for the moment.
Through you, Madam Mayor, what about the fall armyworm that's devastating all the summer crops?
Yep, so fall armyworm is a very good question. That's an established pest, and now it's a bit like Queensland fruit fly. It's managed, we can't eradicate it because it balloons for up to 15 kilometers. It's really a very concerning pest. So we don't manage it per se as a restricted matter, or in the invasive space we don't manage it. Now it's really with the agriculture department and industry to try and develop crops that are tolerant resistant.
It's interesting because we're trying to protect crops from rabbits and everything else. There's not going to be any crops soon if that keeps going.
Yep.
We won't be growing summer crops anymore.
Yeah. So I mean, in 1997, I think it hit Africa. Well, it's from the US. It's moving through the world. It hit Africa, hit us lastly. But there's a lot of work to develop germplasm that's tolerant to fall armyworm. And I used to work in Mexico with the Center for Breeding for Maize and Wheat, CIMMYT it's called, and they are developing a lot of different maize germplasm. Sorghum, I think, is also a challenge, of course, as you know. We're happy to discuss fall armyworm, although that's not under the remit of the land protection.
I think it should belong in the plague one because it is a plague proportion at the moment.
Yeah. So the plague one is an interesting one, and I'm going a bit on a tangent because we don't really deal traditionally with native species, but plague is an exception. So we tend to deal with a restricted matter like rabbits, pigs, dogs, because we can have a debate about dingoes being native or not, but wild dogs, because they're non-native. Fall armyworm is really a pest that's of major concern, but it kind of falls now more in the agriculture space, like some of the leaf miners, the mites. Again, happy to discuss that, but that's a good point. Okay, so the Southern Downs Regional Council contributes about $125,000 a year to the on-ground proportion of to on-ground activities and research activities. And zero, of course, dollars to the wild dog barrier fence, and $363,000 to the rabbit board, and as I said, zero to the plague. And again, happy to discuss that. I think Councillor Carter, yep, okay. Nice to meet you. You, Carter Pigeon, you're part of the board, yes, so you would know more than me on activities there in that space. And otherwise, for the rest, for the on-ground and research component of the Land Protection Fund, we consult with local governments through the statewide oversight group. And I don't think we don't have a rep from your council, but we do have a rep from the Southwest Rock, and who is Councillor Terry Summerfield.
Just a question about the research. Can you tell us what research the Land Protection Fund has done here locally?
I'll go into a bit of a discussion.
Thanks.
So let me maybe speak about the on-ground component of the Land Protection Fund. Basically, we've got operational staff, and Ted is one of the representatives of that team that work throughout Queensland to work on prevention, response, and eradication, and training of people around Queensland. 80% of that team is paid by state funding, so appropriate money or base budget if you wish, and about 20% of the activities is paid by the Land Protection Fund. And we really focus on the prevention eradication part. I think that's the remit of the state government to deal with prohibited and restricted matter at the early stages. there's too many pests and diseases for us to deal with all the established diseases. We can't spray them or eradicate them, so we try and provide tools to manage them, and we count on you to manage a lot of the established pests and diseases. Okay? Prevention is key, so we try and prevent establishment of pests by working with the Commonwealth, by working with other states and territories. And you've got a whole list in our Schedule 1 of the law of prohibited matter that we really don't want to establish. We also work with local governments and industry to deal with prohibited matter when it has been established. And here's the example of tropical soda apple, where we're working, I think, with Logan, is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, also,
And also Southern Downs with Ebenezer, yes, of course, to try and eradicate this weed that's really of plague proportions in New South Wales, for example. And the pathway, of course, is cattle and paunch. An enhanced activity that we do now is a bit of a stick approach. Traditionally, we've been helping out by providing 1080 in the past or training, etc. Now we're also trying to enhance our compliance activities because there are a lot of people that either don't understand the law or don't apply the law. So DPI has got a big team of compliance officers, and we're enhancing that activity. So we've last year I think we investigated more than 300 compliance cases, and there were 34 seizures, and we've fined a few people that had not abided with the law. And this is really very important, especially with our eradication programs like Red Imported Fire and Electric Act in the north. So the on-ground component has worked diligently to eradicate and prevent establishment of species. So more than 40 species have been managed towards eradication. A key one was Karoo thorn just later in the year. We're busy determining proof of freedom for about 23 species, and we've got 10 species, including tropical soda apple, that are in the control phase. The locusts I did speak about, so we are working on monitoring the populations of locusts to ensure that they don't go above a threshold where we'll need to trigger a response. I hope that you've been part of some of the workshops that our team has been providing, and I think Ted will be the contact for that. You're happy to provide more training and more workshop.
yeah.
So we do provide a lot of education and awareness programs to local governments, and mainly training local governments on the powers under the legislation. And as I said, there's been some changes to the legislation, so happy to discuss that. Don't want to go too long, but research, you were speaking about research. So our aim in the research space is to provide tools for prioritized threats like specific pest animals like pigs and weeds. So most of our funding for research comes from the state. 26% comes from Land Protection Fund, and about 8-10% comes from external funds. So, for example, we work with the likes of Meat and Livestock Australia or other entities that fund our research. I think where we're one of the best, maybe in Australia, in the world, sorry, I shouldn't say that, is in the biological control space. Very good. There was a lot of success with calicivirus in the past, etc., and the cacti last time. So building on all those successes, we're developing new biological control agents to tackle some of the prioritized pests like giant rat tail, nervous sedge, etc. You've got a list there. We're also involved in mass rearing of these agents, for example, simeweed, to provide a cheap tool to local governments and entities to manage these pests or these weeds. Work a lot in the herbicide space, and especially to try and tackle again giant rat tail and a lot of aquatic weeds. So we're doing quite a lot of work in the aquatic weed space to manage those weeds. Of course, we've got a whole intelligence team that assesses the risk of new weeds and potential new invasive species. Okay. In the animal space, we're focusing on high-risk pest animals. We work a lot in the pig and deer space, and dogs, of course. But we're also trying to deal with red-eared slider turtles, trying to eradicate them from Queensland, and potential pests like Asian black spine toads. Yeah, happy to discuss further that if you wish. If you're interested in our research specifically, we publish the research highlights every September. We publish all the work that the land protection and state money has invested in. And we also publish operational highlight called the Local Government Annual Report. That's not yet on our website, but if you haven't received that from last year, I'm happy to send it to you. We are going to put it on the web. So these are very informative documents that will really go into the depth of what we do with the Land Protection Fund. Now, what's going ahead now in our space? So we want to be accountable. We're not here to just do business as usual. We want a legacy. Biosecurity Queensland wants a legacy. I want to make a difference to Queensland. So what we're doing now is we are reviewing the way we work. So in 2014, there was a co-investment framework that provided a framework for the Land Protection Fund and enabled us to identify issues, prioritize where our work should be, and also allocate funds to where the need is. And it's going back to full army work, this framework would be the space to discuss some of these issues. So we're reviewing it. 2014 was quite a while ago. So now we've just triggered a review of this, this framework. And the two pillars of this framework are two committees. One is the Research Review Committee, which prioritizes research, prioritize efforts in the research space, which weeds, which pests should we invest our money to tackle. And the statewide oversight group, which is a governance group basically that looks at research but also looks at the operational side. Yes?
Just a question. I hear you talking about pest as animal and plant. What about disease?
So in biosecurity, we've got three programs. We've got animal biosecurity and welfare. They will deal with all the diseases, emerging animal diseases like lappy skin, or we've got plant biosecurity, if you wish, and they deal with all the plants, the industry-related diseases and pests like Panama, TR4, or fall on, in fact, because it falls under the Emergency Plant Pest Response Need. And then the third program is the IPNA, which is invasive plants and animals. So it's mainly weeds, invasive animals that not mosquitoes or things, because they would fall under the other two programs. But we do deal with diseases per se. I'm happy to discuss that if you wish. The Land Protection Fund is mainly focused on invasives, not disease like lumpy skin or FMD, etc.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
So you
Okay.
don't focus on that? That's not a priority for you?
It is a priority for us,
Yeah.
biosecurity, but not for our program.
Okay.
We work with APW, the animal biosecurity team. Alison Cook, who is the chief vet, works on that,
Okay.
and we work with her.
Okay.
And of course, there's synergies. These are silos that are broken down basically. For avian influenza, we're all working together. Yes?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you, Enrico. I'm a fairly practical person. I'm a farmer as well as a councillor. There's a couple of, I guess, good examples where I find that the policy falls well short in practice. For example, when we were droughted, let's say about 5 years ago, and it was an extreme drought, one we haven't seen, 100 100 years. People were bringing in, let's just say, hay from all over the state. Now, when we sell a beast as a farmer, it comes with an NVD, and you write down as the owner of that particular, of those beasts, whether they've been grazed in a certain area, whether they've been, whether they present a risk to the person that's buying. So practically from my point of view, I was getting, for example, some of the hay that was coming in from northern Queensland, up around Gympie, up those areas, not too far north, but north enough. We don't have any steps in place to say that when that load of hay comes from that owner does not sign off to say that they have no noxious weeds, etc., that come into our area when that hay gets dropped off and the fodder gets given out to the cattle. Now, I understand the cattle are starving during a drought, end of story, so you're getting it on the ground as fast as you can. We wound up with noxious weeds such as foxtail, and we then began, after the rain came, we had to eradicate all of those particular weeds that had come in that had been bought from other areas within the state. Now, a simple, I guess, from my perspective, a simple form, similar to what you do when you sell a beast, would assist in saying that the owner says, right, this silage is free of, or this hay is free of X, Y, and Z, or, if there are pests from a particular area that need to be pointed out. So for me, as a farmer, I find that from a biosecurity perspective, we don't have the mechanisms to actually control that, because we're taking somebody's word that that fodder which is coming in is free of pests, etc. And then you find out when it rains, it's not so free of pests, and you're battling against those introduced pests. So that really does concern me.
Yeah, it is a great concern. So we've got interstate policies that regulate trade, so between New South Wales, for example, and Queensland. But regarding to movement of weeds, we used to have the weed hygiene declaration, but now I think one of the key tools is your biosecurity plan for your local government, isn't it?
Yeah, and the general biosecurity obligation. So people need to be aware that they can't be moving stuff. So the whole goes back to educating people of known scheduled plants within an area that they can't be moved, but they certainly do when they make hay, and you end up with them. There used to be declarations made on hygiene of vehicles and a whole range of things, but since the Act's been changed, it's about the general biosecurity obligation. So people that are selling you the hay have that obligation. So then it's up to the authorities then to go back to talk to those people. But you are right, there is a missing step, because you're taking people's word for it. And the general biosecurity obligation is there, but it's not as firm as we'd like it.
And from a second perspective, another example is when a large farm, for example, or any farm, has a gazetted road running through it, and then a contractor may come in and not present a washdown certificate and come from a fire ant zone, or come from a zone which may have carried any one of those pests that you're talking about, and there is no requirement, it would appear, in the legislation to ensure that that plant and equipment is actually washed down and taken care of appropriately, because your farm straddles and sits either side, so you get no choice. Somebody's going to enter your farm, you won't be told, and straight up the centre they'll put a bulldozer or whatever they choose to do, but that piece of machinery can be compromised. And if it's compromised and you have no certificate, then you have no guarantees at all as a farmer. So we're made to put up these signs to say, we respect biosecurity, please respect it, and an expectation that we put these actual plans in place as individual farmers. However, it's very hard to police something when the steps aren't there, when people aren't thinking practically on the ground as to what farmers actually need to do.
Yeah. So under the Act, I'm just reading here, a local government chief executive officer can appoint an authorised person. This gives the person powers of entry to check compliance with the Act or with the program, take action.
That was the CEO, was it?
Yes, so the CEO can appoint an authorised officer in Southern Downs Council to ensure that there's compliance with the Act, ensure that there's compliance with the general biosecurity obligation, and of course local governments can then promote compliance under the Act and building on the different programs that can be developed under the Act.
Yes, so the Act relies on the general biosecurity obligation of all involved. So again, there's then the trigger for authorised officers to do some inspections, compliance activities. So all that goes in with the plan that council comes up with, the plans that individual farmers have, and all that sort of thing. So it all works together, but it's got to start, I suppose, at local government level to get that communication going and then work through it because it is an issue.
Well, the broader issue for me is that we have thousands of these roads within our region,
Yes.
and there needs to be a mechanism or a
Yes.
policy put in place so that farmers are actually A, told that something may be happening, B, it is handled correctly and washdown certificates are produced, but some level of guidelines in regards to those gazetted roads, which may be formed or unformed or otherwise, but so that the farmer themselves is protected in accordance with the biosecurity rule. That does concern me.
And that's, I think, where the programs are key into putting that framework in place. So happy to discuss further that. Just one thing about the co-investment framework. As I say, we are reviewing it, so we will be seeking your feedback and also maybe nominees from your council to participate in working groups that can discuss some of these issues and priorities for you under that should be funded under the Land Protection Fund. So we are seeking that, and what we're going to focus on is reviewing our current framework and see if it's still consistent with the Act. Are there gaps, and also understand at a regional level what are the priorities and what are the issues, and who can fill those gaps and deal with those issues. And then really we want this framework to be fit for purpose. As I say, we want to have a legacy so that in 10 years we don't ask the same questions. Right. Okay, so we'll be in contact with you. I hope you're keen to participate in this discussion. It seems you are. Yep.
Very keen.
Very keen, good. Another quick piece of work that we're doing now, before I keep quiet, is backing local government. So we've noticed that the legislation, Biosecurity Act 2014, which was really implemented in 2016, has been there for quite a while. But as you were saying, not everybody knows. There's a lot of turnover of staff, etc. Not everybody knows. So we're running a project, and we've just appointed 3 officers with the mandate to support local governments in invasive species surveillance and planning techniques, exactly to try and answer some of these questions that you have. So this project is a fixed-term project that will run until late 2027, and it'll be building on some of the previous work that's been done, like better partnership work, etc. And it'll focus on education and awareness, focus on the roles and responsibility with the biosecurity system, so our new Queensland Invasive Plants and Animal Strategy, focus on the gaps, so what skills do we need, how can we help, and also how can we learn from each other in the best practice space, how can we maybe apply what worked well in other local governments and instill efficiencies in the process. And of course, a key component to this is prioritization of biosecurity risk. So we're working with a consultant to try and update our prioritization tool on which pests and diseases we should deal with, which invasives we should deal with, I should say. How do we prioritize that at a regional level? Okay, thank you. So it was more than 20 minutes, apologies.
Yes,
I'm happy to
sorry,
take any
councillors, we've run
questions.
out of time for questions, so we might move on to Craig, and if we do have time at the end, we can come back. Thank you very much, Enrico.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Madam Mayor and Councillors, for having me here today. So I'm going to talk to you today a bit about where Council's DDMRB component of the Land Protection Fund, where that investment goes to, and the value that Council and your residents get from it. There's a couple of quotes there that I sort of like to start with, and those will become apparent as we go through the presentation. Like all things related to biosecurity, rabbits are a complex issue with lots of moving parts and lots of history. So in order to tell the full story, we're going to go right back to the start. And apologies, Councillor Bartley, as the former chair, you'll know this all too well, and Councillor Pigeon, you've heard this pretty recently too. So, but in order, like I said, in order to tell the full story, we need to go right back to the start. The first rabbits actually arrived in Australia with the first fleet in 1788. Those ones didn't take. They were bought for human consumption. 1864, the Queensland Acclimatisation Society had another go, bringing out, I think it was 5 silver grey rabbits. Those ones didn't take either. But Thomas Austin in Barwon Park near Geelong in Victoria, he bought out, I think it was 24 wild European rabbits to his estate for hunting. And those ones did take. So well, in fact, that within a decade they were in plague proportions around the Geelong district in Victoria. And if you saw the Eat the Invaders program last week, I think it was, on the ABC, they did an excellent job of the history of rabbits in Australia. As we know, in Queenslanders, we're a resourceful bunch, so not soon after that happened, there was intentional releases in Queensland for food and hunting and whatever else in the 1870s, including around this area. So the first piece of legislation was introduced, being the Rabbit Act of 1880, and that prohibited the keeping, breeding and introduction of rabbits. And interestingly, it was administered by the Marsupial Board. The Rabbit Boards Act came in about a decade later, and that paved the way for levies to be charged on stock owners for the erection of rabbit-proof fences around the place. You can see by the map there the boundaries of some of those historical rabbit boards. So it's very much more than a southern or southeast Queensland problem. It's spread across much of Queensland. I mentioned that the Rabbit Boards Act provided for fences to be erected. The first fence was actually built by government between 1886 and 1891. Just over 1,000 kilometres of rabbit fence was built along the border, from Mungandai to Cameron's Corner and then to Haddon Corner. Now that was a little bit too late to stop rabbits getting into Queensland from the southern states, but it was still effective because millions and millions of rabbits perished along that fence as they continue their northern migration. And as you can see, in the late 1800s, sarcasm was alive and well. This was a political cartoon that, sort of explained what lots of people no doubt thought of the intention to invest such large amounts in trying to keep rabbits out of the state. In Queensland, so by the late 1800s, the Queensland government reported that figure, just over 7,000 had been killed in Queensland. No doubt it was much higher than that. By 1896, they'd reached the southern boundary of the Leichhardt and Mitchell districts, and actually made it as far in the early 1900s up to the western border of Queensland, reaching the headwaters of the Georgina. And by 1910, well established down in this area. The Bullu River is marked on that map because in the late 1880s, I want to say, they were very wet years, and that greatly aided migration of rabbits up the Bullu River. The country type was really conducive to warren establishment, and that greatly aided their migration. Now, despite rabbits being a massive problem, not everybody wanted them gone. As you can see, the were called, Siro was called back then, because lots of people made a living off rabbits. They were a cheap feed, lots of people made a good living off them. And they actually outstripped the export of beef. I think 22 million rabbits or something in that year were exported overseas.
Just to interject, Madam Mayor, that's the Rabbit Works of Texas, just out there, and that's, if you notice on the truck, it says Bugs Bunny Transport.
That's cute.
The fence that our rabbit barrier fence, I've mentioned that one that was built along the border. This is the one the one we know of today, how it started life, I guess. So in 1893, construction commenced, And that first section of just over 300 kilometres between Dalveen and Warra, in the Western Downs, that was completed in 1898. Around about the same time, the Leichhardt Board completed nearly 600 kilometres of fencing, which, joined onto the Darling Down fence. The Darling Downs fence was extended east into the rough country to the mountainous country to Wilson's Peak, and then a few years later extended from Wilson's Peak through to Mount Lindsay. I always like showing this slide. It shows our first inspector, who I haven't got the dates here and everything on my notes, but he oversaw the erection of most of that fence that we talked about before in the Darling Downs sections, and worked till he died. And his son took over and worked for another 40 years or something until his death. So yeah, I joke that that's our retention and recruitment policies are the same. It's not our uniform though. In 1915, the fence was continued through to a point just west on the Tweed River, just west of Coolangatta. There was 25 miles or 40 k's left unfenced that was considered such rugged and mountainous terrain to be impossible for others to penetrate, but they did. And so the gap was joined up shortly after. It's incredible to think, looking through and having been through some of this rainforest country, that rabbits ever did go through there, but it certainly is a possibility. They don't, not inhabiting that sort of country these days, but with waning biocontrols, it's certainly not outside the realms. And that sled there on the left was used, had a cable that would be attached to a tree at the top of a hill, and then the fencing materials put on the sled, and it would chuck its way up the mountain to save men and animals carting it up the top. I was really surprised to find that we still have that cart. It's in good order, and it was used as recently as 30 years ago in some of this sort of country. So, presentation's not catching up. Sorry, it's just frozen there a bit. So those pictures on the screen there now just more through the rugged and mountainous terrain that was fenced, and yeah, quite incredible to see the lengths they went to one, stay on the border, to stay on the Queensland-New South Wales border through there. And there's actually a section that's wholly in New South Wales because it became too rough for them, and they sought dispensation from the government to leave the Queensland border and go into New South Wales. So we still maintain a section of fence today that's wholly in New South Wales through that Woodbong sort of area. A couple of us actually walked, you'll see the photos hopefully return soon, a couple of us walked this section a few months ago to complete some mapping we had, and I can say firsthand that they didn't shirk anything when they fenced that. Now you can see from the pictures they headed for Wilson's Peak, and they went straight to it, and they actually pegged the fence to the vertical rock face on Wilson's Peak. Good luck getting a contractor to do that today, I think. Sorry that. Yeah, you can see the Wilson's Peak peeking out of the rainforest there. And as I mentioned, there's the, oops, you want to get, oh there it is. You can see the vertical rock face with the netting fence just pegged onto the sheer face. 1930, there was a Royal Commission relating to rabbit, dingo and stock root administration. And following that, the Grazing Districts Improvement Act of 1930 came out, and it abolished all of the boards. It found them to be unviable, unsustainable, inefficient, you name it. But the Darling Downs, Moreton and Leichhardt boards remained. A landmark was Mixo being released in Queensland in 1952, and that had a massive effect. Knocked out 90+% of rabbits, and people thought we'd found the silver bullet after many decades of despair. But unfortunately, rabbits have the ability to, the phenomenal ability to breed, and they're able to breed resistance to myxomatosis, and they quickly recovered, probably from a decade or so later on. The 1960s saw the first sections of our fence top netted for dingoes. I believe the first one was in Killarney district, actually. The Rabbit Act of 1964, that amalgamated the remaining boards together, so the Darling Downs, Moreton and and Leichhardt boards amalgamated to form the Darling Downs Moreton Rabbit Board as we know it today. Our charter then, as it is now, is to maintain 350 miles of existing fence. That figure, 563 k's, has actually come down to 555 k's. It's with more sophisticated mapping, the figure gets more accurate. And importantly, the precept system that Enrico talked about with the Land Protection Fund was established under that piece of legislation, and it replaced the stock owner levies I mentioned before. And it's largely unchanged today. Some of the calculation methodologies have been tinkered with a little, but the precept system remains in place largely unchanged. So here's the extent of the fence in 1964. You can see Coolangatta circled there to the extreme east. And with urbanisation and other things, the extent of the fence contracted to the west, and now to that second from the right circle, Mount Hips. That's where the fence terminates now, literally on the edge of a cliff at the edge of Lamington National Park. And it extends up to, in 1964 anyway, to Goonby, up northwest of Chinchilla. However, Chinchilla Shire Council made several submissions, you see there, to join the dingo barrier fence to combat incursions of rabbits from the northwest, and that all came about from the abandonment of the Leichhardt fence in 1963. And that's what we see today, actually. We see most of our problems coming from the north rather than rabbits coming in from the south through the fence. They're coming around the top where there used to be rabbit fencing, and with the benefit of hindsight, that fencing played a really critical role. So 96-97, we saw 24 k's of new fence erected to join onto the dingo fence, and that picture there now is where our fence starts, where it joins the wild dog fence. Around about that time too, RHDV or calicivirus was released. I mentioned before the effectiveness of Mixo, really good, waned, and then we had, as it waned, obviously numbers built up, and so in 96 we saw RHDV released. And again, about a 90% decrease, fantastic, but again, within about 10 years, we saw its effectiveness start to wane. And we think that the field strains now are showing about 60% effectiveness. As we stand today, I mentioned that before, the length of the fence, about 40% or 220 kilometres is top netted for wild dogs. Virtually all of the replacement programs we do now, we replace rabbit height with dog height. It is a little more expensive, but we recognise the additional value that provides to landholders and industry. We work across about 28,000 square kilometres, 8 local governments, and we have 15 staff and 4 to 6 directors. The value we offer, so the mitigation against impacts to agriculture and the value of ag in our operational area exceeds $1 billion a year, and the value of our control is in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars per annum. The protection of native species, the last State of the Environment report showed rabbits as number one, impacting upon 322 threatened species, which is more than cats and pigs combined. Then the social impacts, I'm sure I'm telling you things you already know about the damage they do to cemeteries, sporting fields and gardens, and structures. So our fence is very much still a going concern. It's maintained in its entirety on a weekly basis by that team of a few others as well, team of dedicated staff. You could do it less regularly, but weekly is around about the sweet spot, we think. You wouldn't want to do it any less because the integrity of the fence would suffer. obviously you'd like to do it more, but obviously it's going to cost more. It's provides other values. I mentioned before the value, strategic value of wild dogs and other invasives, and it came into its own during COVID actually with border closures. We know the fence works too because science tells us. And there's a couple of gents that helped with that dramatically. The first is David Berman on the bottom left there. He showed that the fence has effectively prevented incursions into our area, and he did that through genetic studies that showed populations of rabbits from one side to the other are unrelated. And that's what gave us the evidence too to helped us come to the realisation that the rabbits coming around through the top. Through the bottom. And Peter Ellsworth on the bottom right there, he came up with one of those quotes that was on the title slide about the fence preventing entry and our compliance efforts, stopping the spread of any that did manage to come through. Just a few examples of some of the stuff our maintenance staff deal with on a regular basis. And increasingly too, I mentioned urbanisation down that southeast corner. It's happening, development's happening all over the place. Coal, and gas, renewables, just increases in traffic too. We've seen the likes of their grids being taken out. The grids were initially would have been gates. As the traffic increased over time, the gates made way for grids, and now we're seeing grids pulled out by main roads for safety concerns and things. So we're always battling people wanting to make openings in our fence for whatever reason, battling the challenges that poses to the integrity of the fence. A compliance role is a really important thing that we do. Enrico touched on this before, the legislation, that rabbits are restricted animals. Our role is to manage rabbits in our operational area. So that includes wild rabbit populations and the keeping of pet rabbits. Our compliance team is only three staff, but they, between them, get through a lot of property inspections per year across a pretty big area. And our focus isn't on killing rabbits. We don't shoot, we don't trap, we don't bait. It is removing the breeding populations by destroying the harbour. Rabbits need the right conditions to breed, and if you take that harbour, the warrens and those things away that afford them those conditions, you're 90% of the way there.
Craig, can I ask, the challenge, I guess the south of the district is outside your
Yes.
rabbit board, isn't it? Yeah, because the challenges of the burrows being under the boulders
Yep.
makes it difficult to
does.
do burrow control, but yeah.
It does. There's still ways and means, and we encounter that up this way too with other things, with structures and things like that, of course. But there are ways and means. Our approach is proactive and reactive, and we do a lot of one-on-one landholder work, which is invaluable. But we've got a population of over 1 million, so we use a lot of other targeted communication strategies to spread the word to those people that will never reach one-on-one. Just a couple of pics. That's a broccoli crop in the Lockyer Valley. All that damage you can see was caused by just a small number of rabbits living in a warren on in the dam, the wall of that dam.
Craig, while we've got a break, have we ever found anyone to replace Harley West on the other side of the fence yet? Or someone to do the job that he used to do?
Not in the same capacity. Councillor Bartley, no.
Because he was pretty passionate about it. I think he did an amazing amount of work and relieved the pressure on the fence.
Definitely. A lot of work with organising warren ripping around that Yuki area in particular. Yeah. I don't believe so. I don't think anyone's replaced him.
So there's any capacity for the state or someone to find someone to fill that role over there?
Oh, that's probably a question for these gents, I
But he was
suppose.
basically a lands protection officer.
He was land care coordinator, I think was his title.
Yeah.
He did do a great job. We've done some work. We still do some work down that way, as you say, because it relieves pressure on the fence. And I'll talk in a second about the feed service work we do now. We're certainly happy to do work down there. That's that arrangement too. Thanks, Kieran. Compliance. We recently developed a compliance strategy. We did that in conjunction with our partner councils. You'll see some pics there of some examples of infestations and their control, and some of the mapping we use. We maintain a database with tens of thousands of records in it that we're happy to share council partners. And I mentioned that fee for service offering. Sorry. The fee for service offering we started off, it's essentially, we find that a lot of landholders, particularly smaller landholders that don't have the machinery or the know-how to deal with rabbit infestations effectively, there's not a great deal of contractors out there too that are looking to do this, these sorts of small jobs, or that have the know-how to do it properly, because who specialises in rabbit warren. So we have sort of jumped into that space, and this is an example of a job that we did for a small community group in Killarney. Did it at cost, but we're able to sort of share a bit of the load as well. And so, yeah, really briefly, the process we used, we invested in a small excavator. We also have a skid steer bobcat. Both machines are used on fence maintenance and construction as well. Our guys dig out the warrens. They locate tunnels using the length of poly pipe. I'll click it. Which one? And then, yeah, excavate the tunnels as they find them. So they continue on that process until they're confident all those tunnels are destroyed. And I mentioned before about contractors, even the most well-meaning contractors are unlikely to be that thorough unless we're there directing them, and at which point we may as well be doing the job ourselves. And then at the end of the job, they backfill it all, track roll it, and leave very little opportunity for rabbits to reopen. So we're not in it to make money. We just do this to remove some of the compliance barriers for landholders, and we find that lots of our customers are happy to have the problem gone away, dealt with properly, and they're happy to pay someone for the problem. And we've done some work with council too on some council lands around the place. So 3 factors, and I call it invisible success because we are quite fortunate in Queensland. We've had a barrier fence in place for 130 years. We do compliance, we don't allow pet rabbits. So we're actually quite lucky, and it's the same old story that success is often invisible. People sort of wonder, why do we invest so much in rabbit control? We don't see any rabbits. That's exactly why we invest in it. The 3 things to make sure we maintain our status, I suppose, is that the rabbit fence needs to be maintained in its current extent. Continued funding into biological control is really important because, as MIXO and then RHDB have shown, rabbits have got rabbit superpower is their ability to breed, and they'll outbreed these viruses. So as Ciro sort of puts it, basically we need a new biocontrol every 10 to 15 years. And there's lots of research going on, but more and more we're seeing government shift towards not program funding, more project funding. So there's not the surety of funding that there once was. And continued support from all levels of government. So we've been lucky that Queensland's the only state in Australia that doesn't allow pet rabbits, and that needs to continue. And we have a good regulatory framework too with wild rabbits. So we also need those things to continue. These guys stole my photos. We do attribute a lot of our success to our board of directors. Back in the old days, used to be a bit of talking around the table about shooting rabbits and stuff like that. Now it's very much more about strategic oversight and governance. And each director bringing their own skills and perspective from their respective local government areas. Just some context for SDRC. So SDRC contains 174 k's of fence, 110 k's of which is top netted. It joins onto the Killarney and Stanhill wild dog spur fences too, providing more strategic control options for wild dogs and other species. As Enrico pointed out before, your precept in the current financial year was 363,000. Couldn't tell you what it's going to be next year. We will know that very shortly once we adopt our draft 25-26 budget. We'll consult with you guys on that before we adopt it. From a compliance point of view, last calendar year we inspected over 350 properties in SDRC, and our purchasing, we have in our policy is to buy local, and we set and exceed a target of 90% local. We're based in Warwick, so as you know, so lots of our expenditure happens here. Communications, so say, we're an open book, and these are the main means, I suppose, that we communicate with councils, but always happy to come along to these meetings and talk about what we do. We provide a quarterly communique. The last one went out last week. Just gives a 2-page snapshot on what we're up to. Shows you where your investment is going. Mentioned the budget before, so we'll be circulating a draft budget for comment in early Feb. And then we have our operational staff work really well together, have a good working relationship. Our directors are informed at our board meetings and in between, and like I said, we're always happy to come and have a chat. And lastly, just like to acknowledge Dr. Margaret Cowold, who was the author of this book that we published at the end of 2022. A lot of the pictures and historical information is from her research. So thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you very much. Craig, our councillors, unfortunately, we're at 11 o'clock. If there's any very quick questions, we can field those. Thank you.
Craig, is it book available?
Still it is. We're nearly sold out though.
So if I drop over there, I can pick one up.
And we'll look forward to getting your budget estimates in February to incorporate into our council budget. Thank you all for coming and speaking to us today and giving us that background. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
And looking forward to working with you this year.